Welcome back to Source. Latin America is a culturally diverse region forged by indigenous, European, and African peoples. In colonial times, these groups began mixing, producing a range of identities. Today, about 42 million people in Latin America identify as indigenous, especially in Mexico, Guatemala, Peru, and Bolivia. We'll explore the rich histories of native civilizations and the African diaspora that shaped Latin America. The Maya civilization, in present-day Mexico and Central America, thrived from the pre-classic period around 3000 BC through the Classic era, from 250 to 900 AD. Maya cities like Tikal and Chichen Itza featured massive pyramids, hieroglyphic writing, and advanced astronomy. Many Maya communities persist today. The Aztec or Mexica Empire dominated central Mexico in the 14th to 16th centuries. Its capital, Tenochtitlan, now modern-day Mexico City, was famously conquered by Hernán Cortés in 1521. The Aztecs built monumental temples and maintained a complex tribute system across their city-states. The Inca Empire, centered in Cusco, Peru, became the largest pre-Columbian empire in the Americas. By the early 1500s, it spanned from Ecuador down to Chile. The Incas built vast road networks and terraced farms. Spanish conquistadors led by Pizarro began the empire's overthrow in 1532. The last Inca strongholds fell by the 1570s. Other important peoples include the Taíno of the Caribbean islands, encountered by Columbus in 1492, whose Arawak language gave the world words like canoe hammock and hurricane. The Mapuche, also called Araucanians, in southern Chile and Argentina, resisted Inca and later Spanish conquest. The Mapuche remained Chile's largest indigenous group, around 1.3 million, making up about 84% of Chile's native population, and they retained independence until the late 19th century. The colonial conquest brought profound changes to Latin America, including the forced migration of millions of Africans. The African diaspora has significantly shaped the culture, music, and traditions of the region, creating a rich and diverse cultural tapestry that continues to evolve today. Beginning in 1492, Spanish and Portuguese colonization drastically altered indigenous societies. Old World diseases like smallpox and measles decimated native populations. In regions with large surviving populations, such as the Andean highlands and central Mexico, colonists often forced indigenous people into the encomienda labor system. In areas like Brazil, the Caribbean, and parts of Central America, where native peoples declined sharply, colonists turned to African slaves to fill labor needs. From the 1500s through the 1800s, the transatlantic slave trade brought millions of Africans to Latin America. Of roughly 12 million Africans shipped to the New World, over 4 million were taken to Latin American colonies, with about 3.5 million to Brazil alone. The Caribbean and South America together received around 95% of enslaved Africans, while only about 5% went to what is now the United States. These enslaved people and their descendants fueled colonial economies, particularly in sectors like sugar, coffee, and mining, and left enduring cultural legacies. The blending of indigenous, African, and European cultures created a rich tapestry of mixed heritage in Latin America. This cultural fusion is evident in the region's music, dance, cuisine, and languages. From samba in Brazil to salsa in the Caribbean, the diverse influences have shaped unique and vibrant cultural expressions. The legacy of this mixed heritage continues to influence contemporary Latin American societies, reflecting a complex history of conquest, resistance, and adaptation. Indigenous and African heritages remain central to Latin American culture. Native crops and foods still dominate regional diets. For example, Mexican cuisine has maintained its base of corn, beans, and chili peppers, staples first cultivated by indigenous Americans. Many words in Spanish and English come from indigenous languages. Nahuatl words like chocolate, tomato, coyote, and chili survive today. African influences are evident in music such as salsa, samba, and rumba, as well as in dance and religious practices. In Cuba, about 70% of people practice Afro-Cuban traditions like Santeria, a syncretic Yoruba Catholic faith. Elements of Santeria and other African-rooted beliefs permeate Cuban culture, influencing art, food, music, and dance. Latin America is famous for racial and cultural mixing. The ideology of mestizaje, which comes from the word mixture, celebrates this blend. Under colonial rule, European, indigenous, and African populations intermarried, often coercively, and created new mixed groups. Social labels proliferated. Mestizo, a mix of indigenous and European; mulatto, a mix of African and European; and Zambo, a mix of African and indigenous. Modern genetic studies confirm extensive mixing. Latin America represents the most recent global miscegenation, as Iberian colonists interbred with local Amerindians and Africans starting in the 15th century. Today, many Latin Americans identify as mestizo, or mixed, rather than a single race. Contemporary identity movements and regional case studies. In recent decades, there has been a resurgence of pride and activism around indigenous and Afro-Latino identities. In Mexico, the 1994 Zapatista uprising in Chiapas drew worldwide attention to the struggles of indigenous farmers. Other countries have seen indigenous leaders rise to prominence, like Bolivia's Evo Morales and Mexico's Liliana Wapichana. Latin American governments are also acknowledging African heritage. Mexico's 2015 census reported about 1.38 million Afro-Mexicans, primarily in Guerrero and Oaxaca, and activists are working to amend the constitution to recognize Afro-descendants. In Brazil, the 1988 constitution finally granted land rights to Quilombo, or escaped slave community descendants. Across the region, Black and indigenous cultural festivals, scholarship programs, and political movements are celebrating and reclaiming these heritages. Brazil has the largest population of African descent outside Africa. About 50% of Brazilians identify as mixed or black. African traditions in religion like candomblé, martial art and dance capoeira, and samba music are central to national culture. Since 1988, Brazil's constitution recognizes thousands of Quilombo communities and grants them collective land rights. Haiti's people are overwhelmingly of African descent, a legacy of French colonial plantations. In 1804, Haiti became the world's first black republic after a successful slave revolt. Haitian culture blends African voodoo and Catholic rituals, and traces of Taíno heritage survive in cuisine and religion. Cuba's identity is deeply Afro-Indigenous Spanish. About 70% of Cubans practice Afro-Cuban religions like Santeria and Palamonte. Cuban music genres such as rumba, son, salsa, and conga, and percussion instruments come from African roots. Mexico's population includes the largest indigenous population in the Americas, with tens of millions, about 21%, self-identifying as indigenous. Indigenous languages such as Nahuatl, Mayan, and Mixtec, and traditions like the Day of the Dead from Nahua, are woven into national culture. Mexico also has coastal Afro-Mexican communities in Guerrero and Oaxaca. The 2015 census identified about 1.38 million people as Afro-Mexican. Peru remains heavily shaped by the Inca legacy. Roughly 25% of Peruvians speak Quechua or Aymara. High-altitude Andean culture, including panpipes, alpacas, and festivals like Inti Raymi or Sun Festival, directly descends from pre-Columbian civilization. Colombia has significant Afro-descendant populations on the Pacific and Caribbean coasts, and many indigenous peoples in the Andes and Amazon. African influences are seen in music like cumbia and champeta, dance and cuisine, such as seafood stews. In Chile and Argentina, the Mapuche today still fight for land and autonomy, reflecting a living indigenous presence. The story of Latin America is a tapestry of indigenous civilizations and African heritage woven together. Millennia-old indigenous cultures like the Maya, Aztec, Inca, Taíno, Mapuche, and many others created sophisticated societies before Europeans arrived. The forced migration of Africans added another rich layer, influencing language, religion, and art. Over centuries, these roots blended with Spanish and Portuguese influence to form today's Latin American identities. Understanding the contributions of native and Afro-Latino peoples helps explain the region's diversity. Latin America's past and present are inseparable from the legacies of these original peoples, and honoring their heritage continues to shape its future. If you enjoyed this journey through Latin America's indigenous and African roots, help us keep telling these stories. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new video. What country or culture should we explore next? Let us know in the comments below.